So I welcome everyone. My name is Angela, and thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to turn it over to Osha, my colleague, who is our LGBT outreach director, I think.
Yes. Hi, everybody. That's me. I am the LGBTQ engagement director, and I'm really just excited to be here with all of you. Most all of these spaces are definitely going to be new for me, so that's wonderful. And I have also taken a little look at some of the places that you all are coming from. We have Hawaii, Seattle. I think I saw Missouri in there too. So lots of wonderful spots. I'm calling in from San Diego, California. And I don't know if you all know this, but this is also October, which is LGBTQ History Month. So we couldn't have planned a better timing to be able to just have this conversation. And again, my name is Osha Towers. My pronouns are they, them. I'm Black, I'm queer, I'm non-binary, I'm a Sagittarius, and I work overseeing the LGBTQ work for Compassion and Choices across the country. And to give you a bit of an idea, that really encompasses having conversations with webinars or going to conferences and talking with folks about proactive planning within their communities, as well as having discussions with medical providers, with other forms of caregivers, and just with individuals around what ways they can navigate any sort of end of life system that they come up against, and making sure that they are being met with the proper form of care and that it is as inclusive as possible for them. Another part of my role is making sure that we can get information and resources out there. So what we're going to be diving into today is an incredibly exciting partnership with SAGE, a national and global work, actually, LGBTQ elders organization. And we've had a long-standing relationship with SAGE that we've been building upon. And from that has come this tool, which is really the first of its kind in this for a national level for this country. So it's been an incredible privilege and journey to compile information and do research with them to get that out for you all. But first and foremost, I just want to go over what this conversation is really going to encompass. For starters, I do want to say too, I know that we have folks that are coming from all over the country and from many different roles in the end of life movement. Some of you are medical professionals, some of you might be social workers or caregivers for your own family and loved ones, or for your overall more wide local community. Some of you might be educators, activists, and I just commend you for your work and really thank you for that. This tool is meant to be something that can be useful in a variety of different fields and just on a personal level for someone to walk through. I also recognize that some of you may be a part of the LGBTQ community. And some of you, this may be the first time that you really get the opportunity to hear more information about some of the needs that come up for LGBTQ folks. This isn't meant to be a one-on-one, although I'm always happy to do that. But if you do have more specific questions around some of the things that I'm covering, of course, we have space at the end, and I'm happy to dig deeper. But then my email is also going to be listed later too. But this is really meant to dive into our history and also this tool. So we'll be going over the LGBTQ movement and the end of life movement, as well as the continued needs that we have within end of life care. Then I'll dig deeper briefly over the tool, and you can get a PDF link at the end too to go along with it. And actually, as I say that out loud, can one of you drop the link in the chat for me, and I can send that in. And then the other bit is, and you can find that on our LGBTQ page on the website. And then the last part is really what we can do together moving forward to continue to support our LGBTQ community. And first off, I'm just going to share a sweet video of one of our advocates out of Newark talking about many of the struggles that I'll be discussing later on faced by the community.
I'm Kevin E. Taylor. I'm 57 years old. I hail from the great city.
Oh, Osha, I can't hear it once you muted
I'm
yourself.
Director of LGBTQ
sorry.
Services, NJCRI, and I'm an advocate for compassion and choice. Church is really community work. It's compassion and choices, which, I love a good title. But reading and reading, I was like, oh, they're trying to have some of the same conversations we have. My assistant pastor always has kind of, is your life in order annually? She does this kind of making sure people's paperwork is updated. I was like, oh, that's the stuff. And realizing that it's one thing to be struggling with 19-year-old son who got murdered and you weren't prepared to bury him, right? So that's already grief loss thing that, I understand why you got to do this kind of, we weren't prepared, we didn't have any assurance. How come 91-year-old grandmama, you aren't prepared to bury either? How did you not have any assurance? How are you not prepared? How are you doing a GoFundMe for her too? And realizing that the uncomfortable conversation is in some communities, especially communities of color, we don't like talking about death, any of it, right? And so you add to that the fact that, the LGBTQ, what somebody said, we're in the middle of this pandemic, and this is the first time we've ever been in a pandemic. I said, it might be the first time for you, but as a Black gay man, we had crack, HIV, and AIDS. So this is my number three. And they were like, oh, I never thought of that. I was like, so it's about some very uncomfortable conversations that always have to be had as a preacher. I am called into rooms when it's the last days, right? So it's like these last rites of passage, these conversations are conversations that I always have to have. And so this feels like a good opportunity to shape it in such a way that people don't always have to run from it or hear it and go right to trepidation. It could be resourceful. The idea, the compassion and choices could offer some choices that can include financial literacy or, estate planning or, how to have the conversation when, right? You can't leave that stuff unanswered. I've got children. I've got a son who's got three children, just had a daughter a few weeks ago. I've got grandkids. I want my son in grief to not have to, son, here is where my papers are. Here's the email. If you fail to prepare to fail. That is the first quote I ever heard, and it's the last one that will ever be applicable to me. Inform people, here's what you know. Empower. Here's what you know you don't know. Let's help. And you advocate. Let's say, here's somebody to help you with the part you know you don't know.
I always have to laugh when I see old images of myself because I definitely do not have the red hair anymore. But yeah, or the long hair anymore. But I really appreciate that video with RevKev just as an introduction to some of the things that I'll be covering briefly now, just going over things like the HIV and AIDS epidemic and the ways that that intersects with end-of-life care for LGBTQ folks and more broadly. And then also overall, for me, this is such a passion project of really making sure that we have a proactive planning guide for our community because with the additional barriers that we face, it is so incredibly essential that we make a point of getting everything arranged to make sure that we can combat some of that additional discrimination and bias that we face within healthcare settings, with funeral homes, across the board. So one of the first things that I'll just talk about is overall the fact that one of the most fascinating things to me is when folks see this conversation and are like, LGBTQ folks must not be interested, or why are we highlighting this community, And I always have to remind people that when we talk about the end of life movement, that really started in the profound way that we're seeing it, and when we have just conversations around medical aid and dying and things out of the 80s. And the significance of that timeline is that that came from the start of the AIDS epidemic. And during the AIDS epidemic, we're seeing, especially young gay men, dying and being taken by this illness in such a extreme way where so many young people are dying so rapidly. And also seeing folks that are being denied access to being touched by their loved ones, to having any additional considerations when it comes to, well, what does my end of life look like when I know that I'm going to die of this? And during that time, we saw a total shift in community care when it came to, especially want to highlight our women, especially lesbian folks that came together to make sure that our young gay men were taken care of, that they were actually being held and being comforted, that they were getting their needs met if they couldn't get them met in a medical setting. So because of that advocacy and folks being empowered to take a step forward outside of the current systems that we had, we saw people really banding together within our hospice care and overall within the end of life movement to allow folks the opportunity to choose the ways that they can be empowered in their death. And also really just the ways that we can shift how we're thinking about honoring individuals and ways that we can also be more mindful around community care and advocacy. One of the things with the LGBTQ community that is a continued struggle and need that we face is not always having supportive families and loved ones that are going to show up for us at the end of life. And because of that, it is essential to be able to have communities coming together outside of necessarily a spouse or a child or a parent. Even though we obviously also do have supportive folks in those ways too for some individuals, but thinking outside of the box of who else can we call upon to talk to the doctor, to care for our body, to arrange financial planning and figure out what's going to happen with the estate and with our belongings. So from this time, we've really just seen a profound shift in care and overall just highlighting where there are gaps within needs for the LGBTQ community and overall within end of life care. And although we saw so many of those gaps in our face during that time, in the start of the 80s, we still continue to see lots of discrimination and violence being perpetuated upon LGBTQ folks. One of the statistics that comes up is 50% of LGBT adults that report discrimination from healthcare providers. And that number only increases when you solely look at trans individuals to a rise of 70%. And 57% of surveyed LGBTQ adults sharing that they don't want to actually open up about their sexual orientation or their gender identity because of fears that that is going to impact the sort of care that they would receive when it comes to advanced care planning and end of life care. For me, I actually came into this work seeing an individual that passed away and my friend that was their partner being completely bypassed for their care and it being something where now the family is making all these choices and decisions for them and not honoring their identity or the life that they lived. And when I discovered that that is a common experience for LGBTQ folks, that is what led me to doing more of my own research and understanding around end of life care and death doula support and ways that we can really, really prioritize getting all of our affairs in order and naming the people that we want to care for us and what our needs are for the end of life before it's too late. And one of our council members actually shared this quote that the unique experiences and needs of LGBTQ plus individuals at end of life are often invisible and not explicitly discussed. And that is what really empowered them to being able to join this council. And I think that that is so incredibly true. And one of the things that I want you all to really hold on to and think about as we move forward through the toolkit, because whether or not these are new things for you or something that you've spent a lot of time thinking about, these are struggles that LGBTQ folks face on a regular basis when trying to access care. So with that being said, this tool really is about moving beyond just recognizing the struggle and the pain and difficulties that LGBTQ folks face when trying to access end of life care and when just dying, and really making a point of saying, okay, well, here's a guide, here's a way to answer a lot of those questions, not be so overloaded and overwhelmed with trying to go through all the paperwork. And here's a sleek and creative way to really just be able to give folks some advocacy and some ability to plan for themselves and for the rest of their community. I'll also share too, I mentioned SAGE earlier, but SAGE really came to us to be able to build out something because of recognizing that compassion and choices has been leading this work when it comes to not only medical aid and dying, but also just prioritizing the needs of individuals during the end of life. And we've done so much work with putting out so many other amazing resources. I'm sure all of you are familiar with our advanced care planning tools as well. So highlighting the fact that we've already done so much good work for the community, but wanting to get a tool that is specific to LGBTQ folks was important to both of us. So I got to meet with Cheryl and Eliza, two folks on their team, and someone else on our team, Allie Lynch, to create this PDF version. And soon we'll hopefully have a hard copy version for folks that is meant not to have every single thing checked marked on your box and this is just one booklet and then you're good to go and nothing more, but really a starting guide for opening up this conversation. So when going through the guide, what you'll notice too is that this covers such an array of topics. So having conversations around first, what makes sense to be thinking about while you're still feeling good, while everything is seeming calm, you're not too worried, you're not in the middle of grief and stress mode, but able to do some of that planning and get organized proactively. So thinking about things like a healthcare proxy and a will and some of those more financial and estate planning needs. An important thing with LGBTQ folks is again to think about who can speak for me that I know and that I trust. Because as I mentioned before, sometimes that can fall on the backs of family members that folks may have not seen for years, but the default in our country is next of kin in places. So being able to name someone that truly does know you and that you've had this conversation with already. And something that I will appreciate about this tool and highlight later when I go more into the healthcare proxy work is that it's not only about how do I find someone to name as my healthcare proxy, but also how as a healthcare proxy am I prepared to be that person and actually stand up and advocate for this individual? And do I know what I'm signing up for when I'm saying that that's going to be me? Because I do think that sometimes that can be a struggle where, of course, you want to be supportive. And of course, you want to say the right things and be there for your loved one, but not necessarily knowing what that actually looks like and really having a lot of support in that area. The next bit is making sure that we're able to plan out our caregivers, our healthcare team, figuring out things around palliative care. And one of the main resources that I'll be showing later is having a checklist of, okay, here are all of my guides that I know for a fact I need to have. Here's the essential information about me, about my body, about my pronouns, and having that already set and ready to go, as well as where the will is, where the post is, all of those things. So that's organized. And again, you're not having to be bombarded with wondering, well, what 20 million things do I need? I know that I need everything on this list and that there's a folder and I have that saved somewhere where it's easily accessible, not up in an attic in a safe that nobody has access to or anything like that. Next, really digging into things around hospice care as well as compassionate end of life options. including things around VSADs, voluntarily stop eating and drinking, medical aid and dying, and many other compassionate options that folks have. And also what it looks like to say goodbye to your community and make space for an individual when they have the opportunity to say their last words to their loved ones and whatever messages they want to leave behind. Also, something that we don't often always go into or that people leave out thinking about until it's time is what happens next. What do we want to do with the body after death, as well as considering things around just registering the body and the notification, um, along with the next step of figuring out the funeral home, the mortician, if there's any ways that we want to make a memorial or any other celebratory means for honoring this individual. One of the things that this tool will also go into that isn't highlighted in the table of contents here is death dual support and end of life care, and also thinking about grief and what additional tools you have accessible to you to make sure that everyone within this community, including that individual, is able to make space to just be sad and cry and honor them. So again, when thinking about the checklist that I mentioned, as well as how we honor individuals, here are two of my favorite resources in there. And this is just a way to get down on this first one about me and honoring me. Here are just the top things when it comes to this is literally just my name, my information, what I do, who my people are, where I live, my passwords, having that all condensed in one area. And it doesn't necessarily have to fit on this form. This can just be, a starting point for that. I know many folks that will move into a Google Doc or something else, like a longer draft or putting it in a journal, whatever have you. But this being an easy checklist for folks to jot it down. And then some additional ways of being able to support honoring that individual. For folks that have already or want to spend the time dreaming out what your final moments, you want those to look like, the space and the environment that you want to be in, who you want to be there. If there's any rituals that an individual wants performed for them after they pass away, if there's any things that should be known for what they want done with their body, including things like organ donation, as well as burials and anything like that. And overall, the visions that they have for any ways of honoring them, if that's in a funeral, if that's with a silent space, what have you. And then this checklist going through, again, making sure we have the will, we know who our person is, we have the DNR if that's needed, we have our values and goals of care worksheet, which is something similar that you all may be familiar with within the Compassion and Choices, Advanced Care Planning Guide, the End of Life Care Guide. Do we have our forms for our trust and updated estate, ownership titles? Do we have a legacy plan, information for the dependents that may be in our life, any children, if you have pets, what's happening to your dog or your cat, making sure that all of those things are prepared as well. And again, things around funeral homes and organ donation. The next bit is thinking for a caregiver. One of the things that can be incredibly daunting for LGBTQ folks is being placed in some sort of long-term care unit or nursing home, or just having someone that is coming to the home to care for a person, because of not knowing if that is truly going to be a safe person, if they're going to honor them, their pronouns. Can I share about my partner to you? Can I talk about just the life that I lived? Or is that going to be an issue? So being able to not only have conversations proactively if there's an opportunity to choose who we want that person to be, but also to make sure that that person is informed around this is who I am, these are my pronouns, in a similar way where I introduced my identity and myself to you all at the beginning of this conversation, having that down on paper so it's something that this person can find or any additional caregivers can find easily. If there's any considerations around the religion or spirituality that this individual has, or just how they like to spend their time and what brings them joy in life. Knowing those facts so people are able to relate to the person that they're caring for, in a better way of being able to honor them during any sort of medical time that they're experiencing, and knowing if there's any additional needs around comfort. This is just simple things that feel good for me. This might be the lighting shifts that would be better to make sure that I'm not so overwhelmed. I know for me, intense overhead lighting, I will cry. I just want to live in a cave most of the time, anyways, unless I'm out in the sun. So if this individual is similar, then having that down, and if there's any food needs or other ways that they could be comforted, wrapping up in a blanket, knowing that their favorite show was able to play, or that they'll be able to have their hair done in a particular type of way that they always did, during earlier times in their life, or if they want their makeup done in a particular type of way, especially when thinking about folks that are trans, and if they have transitioned in any medical way or just overall in their attire and appearance, then making sure that those ways are continued to be honored. So if they want to be dolled up, then having that as something for an individual, or if there's any needs that would feel more euphoric around shaving and things like that, then making sure that those things are being able to be named. Another important tool within this guide is just asking somebody if you can be my healthcare proxy. I think that this is so sweet because it can be easy to just say, get a healthcare proxy. You should do that. We get that done. We know that's important. But really walking you through, okay, so what does that actually look like? How can that conversation go? Here's some additional ways to ask the question and a response if people need more information around what even is a healthcare proxy. Can I know what I'm signing up for? Is that the right thing for me? So I think that this tool is really useful in that way. And then in the end, being able to also have some additional information around what resources a lot of this tools was created based off of. And if folks want to dig deeper through any of these organization resources, they have them here. I think that something that always makes me really happy and feels robust in a tool is being able to name other folks outside of just the org that made this, right? So you can see that we have so many folks across the country, including legal folks, palliative care folks, AARP, National Hospice, Diverse Elders Coalition, just a variety of other organizations and organizers that have contributed so much to the end of life care movement when it comes to LGBTQ individuals. So wanting to highlight all the contributions that they have at the end here and information that we pulled from them. One in particular that I definitely want to make sure to name that also was tremendous in being able to create this tool and came out with this tool during the time of our came out with their tool during the time of our creation was the WAKE program, and that created the Louisiana LGBTQ plus end of life guide. And that is another really wonderful guide for LGBTQ folks down south in Louisiana, which is actually where my family is from. So just a robust sum of really good forms and additional supports for folks outside of just this one guide so they can continue to feel supported. And I just want to say too that the other reason that this is so incredibly important to me and just such a passion project is just because of all of the advocates and supporters that we have, including you all, including our LGBTQ Leadership Council, including other folks that just came through and wanted to share their own experience and be storytellers to Compassionate Choices. And that was a huge part of why we even wanted to create this guide, but also a lot of the things that come up and are being referenced as additional tools and reasons that the LGBTQ community should find something like this guide to be able to use with their caregivers and within healthcare settings. So this is truly the heart of the work here. So now I'm just at about 30, and I wanted to open it up to you all for any additional questions or more insights that you might have. So I'm going to just put on this last page so you can see my information. Here is my email, as well as a link to our LGBTQ community engagement page. And thank you to Angela or Leslie that included the advanced care planning toolkit link in the chat as well. But I'm going to close it up there, and then we can stop sharing and answer any questions.
Thanks, Osha. And just a reminder, I'm going to be sending out an email. Today's Friday, so sometime next week with this recording. And we also have the link to the toolkit set to go out in the email. So you will be getting that by next week. But I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.